Oh, it got quiet quickly in here. Thank you. Again, thank you. My name is Adrienne Billing-Smith from the town of West Hartford. Happy to be here in collaboration with UConn Law. Thank you so much for hosting us and this incredible panel that we have tonight. I think that it's important that we have these discussions, these community discussions, and have an opportunity to hear from people who are the experts in it and are living it. And advocating for you as residents of Hartford, the greater Hartford area. I want to take a moment and welcome. You good? And welcome Mayor Sherry Cantor from the town of West Hartford. She's actually the individual who sparked this conversation and felt like it was important to get our community partners together. I also want to thank the town of East Hartford. Unfortunately, Mayor Connor Martin couldn't be here tonight, but I want to take a minute to introduce Mayor Sherry Cantor, who will give us our welcome today.
I didn't. Yeah, this is very funny when I follow Adrienne, Division I basketball player, and I was not. Okay. So, good evening, everyone, and I'm so appreciative that you are here. I'm Mayor Sherry Cantor, Mayor of West Hartford, and it's my privilege to welcome you to this Know Your Rights Forum. I want to thank our partners in East Hartford. I'm a little sad that Mayor Martin couldn't be here. He's a wonderful partner, and I'm grateful for his participation and his interest in bringing this to you. So, and of course, I am a UConn trustee, so I'm always so proud to be in this space and to have our dean here, Dean Nelson. Thank you so much for hosting us and for helping us to create this space for this very important conversation. I also want to begin by expressing my sincere appreciation to our esteemed panelists, legal experts, advocates, law enforcement leaders who have dedicated their time, their careers, and their expertise to this work to keep us safe and to protect our rights. Your willingness to come together, to share information, and to engage thoughtfully on complex and deeply personal issues is incredibly valuable to our community. We're meeting at a time when many in our immigrant communities are experiencing a tremendous amount of anxiety and uncertainty. Policies and enforcement action at the federal level can feel overwhelming, and for families very close and for families if it's very close to home, that stress is real, and it is important that we acknowledge it. At the same time, we know that access to clear, accurate information is one of the most important tools and powerful tools we can offer. Understanding your rights, what protections exist, how local and state policies apply, and what to expect in different situations can help people make informed decisions and feel a greater sense of agency. We also recognize something very important. Many of the people who most need this information may not feel comfortable attending a public forum like this. That's why it matters that this conversation extends beyond this room. For those watching at home who may view this later, for those who will share this information with a friend, a neighbor, or family member, your participation is just as important. In West Hartford, we're committed to fostering a community that is welcoming, inclusive, and grounded in trust. Public safety depends on strong relationships where residents feel safe seeking help, reporting concerns, and engaging with local institutions. That trust is essential, and conversations like this help to strengthen it. Tonight is about learning, about listening, and about making sure that people have the information, the accurate information they need to navigate an increasingly complex landscape. Thank you to our panelists, our partners, and thank you all for being here for this important discussion. I appreciate it very much.
Oh, okay. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening. We have an informative panel that will help us navigate this conversation from a nonpartisan and fact-based perspective. So let's begin with introductions. We'll start with myself. I'm Don Bell. I am policy counsel at the Project on Government Oversight, and the Constitution Project. My focus is on surveillance policy, both foreign surveillance, so think Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, and domestic surveillance, think about facial recognition technology, data brokers, and automated license plate readers, just to name a few things. And I'm also honored to serve as vice chair of the East Hartford Town Council.
Hi, everyone. I'm Alana Bildner. Use she, her pronouns. I am senior staff attorney here at the ACLU of Connecticut, where I've been for 7 years. And I also have I guess another hat that I wear, supervising cases with Yale's Immigrant and Worker Rights Clinic. Lovely to be here.
Good evening. Maggie Mitchell-Salem with IRIS, Integrated Refugee and Immigrant Services. I want to acknowledge that we have a couple of former staff and volunteers from the Hartford area in the audience. Always great to see folks that I don't think ever really leave us. IRIS is a big family, and unfortunately, the changes of the past couple of years have had an impact on just how many people are in the family at the moment, but the family is large. Thank you.
My name is John Bauer. I teach at this law school. I've been here since 1988, but most recently, for the last 24 years, I've been directing a program called the Asylum and Human Rights Clinic, in which law students represent people seeking refuge from persecution in the United States. So thank you for coming, and I look forward to our discussion.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Vernon Riddick. I currently serve as the police chief of the West Hartford Police Department. I've been here now in 8 years. I've been involved in law enforcement for 33 years. I spent 24 years in the Waterbury Police Department, retiring as police chief, and then prior to that, approximately 18 months in the Ansonia Police Department. I will want to take a point of privilege and acknowledge Mayor Cantor and Michael on 41 years, her husband, of marriage, and she's here instead of going out. God bless you. Acknowledge. Service over duty.
Well, let's begin with talking about the current administration's mechanisms put in place when it comes to immigration. More specifically, how it's changed the legal landscape for refugees and immigrants of any status in the country. John, Alana, Maggie, what have you seen?
I'll start, I guess, a lot. Just to give some background on the landscape of the changes we're seeing, people in this country who lack an official immigration status have always been vulnerable and at risk of being picked up by immigration authorities and put into removal proceedings. But in the past, ICE focused its enforcement efforts on just a small fraction of the 10 million or so people who live in the US without documentation. They would prioritize going after people with criminal records, people who just recently crossed the border, and people who had already been through the process and had been ordered removed by an immigration judge. Folks who had been in the United States for many years, were law-abiding, had built families and lives in this country, were much less likely to be taken into custody. And a lot of people who could have been vulnerable for removal benefited from government programs that let them stay here and work legally. That notably included temporary protected status, which was available for people from certain designated countries like Haiti, Venezuela, Afghanistan, and Myanmar, where the US government had determined that sending people back to those places would be unconscionable because of situations of war or unrest in those countries. By the end of the Biden administration, about 1 million people had temporary protected status. Similarly, the DACA program gave about 500,000 people who had come to the US when they were kids some assurance that they wouldn't face removal. In 2024, as we all know, Donald Trump ran on a campaign platform of mass deportations, and Congress gave him the tools to make that to some degree a reality by passing the so-called Big Beautiful Bill Act in July of 2025, which dumped just a ton of money on ICE, 75 billion additional dollars on top of its regular congressional appropriation. And as a result of that funding, that by the way is how ICE keeps operating even during the government shutdown of the Department of Homeland Security. They have been able to increase the number of ICE agents by 36%, while other federal agencies were cutting staff. At the beginning of Trump's second term, 40,000 people every day were in immigration detention. Now it's 75,000 people. It's a 75% increase. ICE has gotten rid of past policies that generally barred them from making immigration arrests at sensitive locations like hospitals, schools, places of worship, and courthouses. And increasingly, they've moved away from targeted enforcement, where they're looking for particular individuals with deportation orders or with a criminal record. And they're doing, as we've seen in Minnesota and other places, huge sweeps where roving patrols of ICE or Customs and Border Protection agents question and detain anyone they encounter who they think may be in the U.S. unlawfully. And they're often targeting people based on their ethnicity or perceived ethnicity or other broad sweeping factors like they're working in a low-wage job. The administration has been getting rid of temporary protected status protections for Venezuelans, Haitians, people of other nationalities. That's been slowed down a bit by some court decisions, but the Supreme Court is taking up the issue in the next few weeks and very likely will give the administration the green light to end these protections. And the right to asylum is being severely compromised. Even though Congress provided in the Refugee Act of 1980 that anyone who's physically present in or who arrives in the United States has the right to apply for asylum. In his first days in office, President Trump issued an executive order that effectively shut down asylum at the border. And the Attorney General has been issuing a raft of decisions that are binding on immigration judges around the country that make it virtually impossible for people who are fleeing from situations of domestic violence or harm from gangs or drug cartels to be granted asylum. And asylum claims are now routinely being pretermitted, in other words, being dismissed without a hearing whenever the Department of Homeland Security asserts that it could send the person to a so-called safe third country where they could seek asylum there instead of seeking it in the US. And these safe third countries are places like Uganda, Honduras, Ecuador, countries that aren't safe at all and don't have functioning asylum systems. Some other changes from past practice: it used to be the case that people with a pending asylum application or someone with a pending green card application, like someone married to a US citizen who's seeking a green card based on marriage, even if they had overstayed a visa or otherwise lacked a lawful immigration status, they were allowed to pursue their applications without being detained. Now, increasingly, when people come out for their hearings or immigration interviews or fingerprinting appointments, they're taken into custody and have to pursue their claims in detention. There's so much more. Let me stop there. I'm sure others will touch on other atrocities that are happening.
I'll add, I think that it's truly, there are too many to name. I mean, that is the problem, right? And as we all know, I think from, I just want to echo what John so nicely put. it's really it's a war on every front. It's an attack on every front, and it's really that there's a strategy, so to speak. It's just throw everything at the wall and see what sticks, right? So people with lawful status are suddenly being detained when they would never have been detained before. We're trying to resurrect the Alien Enemies Act. We're trying to get rid of birthright citizenship. Immigration judges have been fired. The Board of Immigration Appeals, which is the appellate court for immigration, has essentially been reduced to a rubber stamp. Not even essentially, I think by its own admission, it would like to be reduced to a rubber stamp for anything an immigration judge says. We've eroded all of these protections, DACA, TPS, on and on and on. So it is truly like anything that can be done is to weaken immigration protections in this country is being done. And I'll just add the other thing, I think, from where I sit as a civil rights, as someone who litigates civil rights cases and works usually on constitutional issues, there's been this real effort to basically insulate anything that touches immigration from the rest of our rights, right? From our constitutional rights, from other federal law, to basically say, kind of wave a magic wand and say, well, if it's about immigration, then that belongs in immigration court. It belongs in administrative agencies, administrative proceedings. It's the executive branch. We can't touch it, essentially. No federal court can intervene. No one else can say until maybe a few years down the road if anything went horribly awry here, and that's terrifying, right? That's terrifying. The First Amendment exists even in cases that touch on immigration. The Sixth Amendment exists. The Fourth Amendment, right? All of these rights that we know and hopefully hold dear, they're all being tossed aside as long as something touches immigration. And that's not how it is, and that's not how it should be.
You guys are a tough act to follow. I'm going to first just make sure that everyone understands that someone seeking asylum and someone who is seeking or has refugee status, this is the same thing. These are two different words that are basically a point of location. You seek asylum at the border of the country that you're looking for safety in. Why are you seeking that protection? For the same reasons that refugees seek that protection. You have a credible fear of harm, persecution, or worse in your country of origin. And you are coming seeking safety in another country. Refugees are already, almost always, but there are always exceptions, outside of their country of origin. And they are seeking to be resettled in a third country. Often it's because, and I'm going to use the Middle East, which I know well as an example, in Lebanon and Jordan and Turkey and Iraq and other countries in the Middle East, Syrian refugees. Half of the country of Syria, 24 million people. 12 million people were on the move. Most of them didn't come here. Most of them didn't go to Europe. They went to all of the surrounding countries. Those countries who already have sizable existing refugee populations are not able to absorb them all. We're talking millions in each country. So they are not really formally settled. They don't have the full legal rights of citizens of those countries, and they are often seeking protection elsewhere until they can reasonably return home, which in the case of Syria was after a 13-year brutal civil war. And so the very few that manage to make it to Europe and the US, they're refugees because they have been in that second country and they are going to another country where they should be formally resettled. The asylum seeker is just doing it at the border of the country they want to be settled in. So it really is all about location, two different words. I think it's important because most people don't understand that we're basically talking about the people are seeking the same protection and for the same exact reason. I want to focus a little more on refugees because so many of the other categories have already been covered so well. Refugees in Minnesota, and Minnesota was definitely the test case for the playbook of what they're looking to roll out nationally. something called Operation Paris with 2 R's was taking place. And this was literally picking refugees up off the street in a highly racialized way, as John mentioned, based on someone's looks, based on the language they're speaking, sometimes with more targeted information, and taken to Texas immediately. So there's no opportunity to file a habeas petition to try to stop them from being removed, right? Because our Constitution does apply to all people in the country. It does not have an asterisk next to it indicating immigration status. So before anyone can file a habeas petition, they're whisked off. And this is also the case in other states where they're going from a state that may not have a warehousing facility set up yet for detention, and they're moving them to states that are also in a generally more permissive legal environment where they can hold and detain people indefinitely. They were taken to Texas and re-interviewed. Let me explain something about what it means to be a refugee and actually make it to the United States. You're overseas in a refugee camp. A UN agency or the US government or some other private agency interviews you, decides that they want to recommend you for resettlement in a Western country. That Western country, let's pick the US, then runs a biographical scan, a detailed, highly detailed summary of who you are, where you've been, what you're claiming is your reason for seeking refuge and being resettled. Then that information goes to all of our various security agencies. They often come back based on the information they get from the security agencies and ask you more clarifying questions. You make it through this process. Now we're at a couple of years. They send your biodata, right, your biometrics, to be scanned. Another security review. And then you may be offered placement. If you were one of thousands, literally 100,000 people who on January 25th, 2025 were waiting in the queue, having gone through this process, having waited years, you were out of luck because the administration slammed the door on new refugees who had already been in the pipeline. And that case has finally made its way through the system and was not resolved in favor of the plaintiffs. They will be unable to enter the United States during this president's term. So refugees go through that process in order to get here. Operation Paris is the detention of refugees, taking them to another state in order to be re-interviewed. The re-interviewing is going to continue, but on Monday, federal court in Massachusetts issued a pause on the detention. So that means it's a good thing, but it's a limited victory. It doesn't mean that they're not going to be re-interviewed. Again, after having gone through a years-long process, it means that they cannot be taken and detained. As of now, it is a pause. It's going to wind its way through more courts. And so we're happy for that, but the re-interviews go on. And so part of what we're offering to refugees in particular is a 5-step process that they need to be aware of. Have a file folder with any information that they have from their interview process, their original interview process, and most people will have very little to anything. So then file a FOIA request. Most refugees are not coming from countries where FOIA is a thing. That's Freedom of Information Act. File a FOIA request to try to get your information. Have the name of a lawyer. Just someone's name and a phone number, and hopefully memorize it that you can make a phone call if you are picked up for re-interview. You should not be detained any longer, but you may need to go in for re-interview and you're going to need someone to call. No one should go into these interviews alone. They should either have an accredited representative. This is a Department of Justice accreditation program. Our staff are accredited. or even better with a lawyer. But immigration lawyers right now, as you might expect, are in credible, good immigration lawyers are in short supply and with long lists. And many are trying to stay viable commercially, and they're also taking pro bono cases. And then the last piece is just make a family preparedness plan. Because this administration, in, again, a highly racialized immigration policy that favors whites over all others, and they say this explicitly, so I'm not making anything up, you don't know what is going to happen to you, and make sure your family has a plan. These are pretty awful things to tell people who have just spent years displaced, seeking safety, and they've now come here. And it's an absolute, and I'm sorry, I can't say this without just feeling so deeply aggrieved and offended as an American. This is not who we are. Somebody may have a different vision for this country, but I think the fact that so many people now who may have even supported Trump in some of these policies are now saying, this is going too far. This is not us. And I will stop there. Thank you.
So as you can tell, there's a lot that's happening from the practitioner side, obviously a lot happening in communities across the country. But there's also a lot that is happening in the law enforcement community. When you think about federalism, right, we have federal law enforcement agents and officers, and then we have state and local law enforcement that are operating and supporting their own mission of protecting the residents of a given locale. So Chief Riddick, for local law enforcement, has all of this changed your duties or responsibilities? And how have you and your officers managed the relationship with federal immigration officers, if things have changed at all?
No change. That's the very simple answer regarding that. There's a clear line of distinction between what the federal agents can do, state and local can do. So as far as our interactions with ICE or any other federal agency, there hasn't been a change. Has there been a change in ICE, their usage? I think we have heard that. But as far at our level, no change. We have the Trust Act, which I'm sure one of these very smart people will probably get into later, which clearly delineates what our roles and responsibilities are in the state of Connecticut as law enforcement. We are bound by that per statute. And as long as we adhere to that, we will have no issues.
So then maybe as a follow-up to that, in conversations with people in the community, how do you communicate that nothing's really changed? You know, you are still following state law, and that the police department is a resource that belongs to the entire community and that they should reach out if there is an emergency.
And I'm not being flippant. That's our message that we provide all the time. The same information we provided during George Floyd and the protest in 2020. We had community engagement. We have our public safety meetings. We provided information. We have our community relations officers, our regular officers out in the field. There really, for West Hartford, there really hasn't been a change. Now, mind you, we haven't had the interactions that other communities have had, and maybe later on we can get into some of the things that I am aware of within this state. But if we stay the course, and if we follow the law, and if we follow the Trust Act, we'll be fine.
And I think that's a good segue to information and talking about how practitioners especially share information and prevent misinformation from spreading. I think we all know with the advent of social media, there's a lot out there that is not real at all, but may have, you know, some sort of kernel of a half of a truth, right? That catches fire. And so it makes your job, I would imagine, that much more difficult. So we've discussed some of the mechanisms used in current immigration law. And in your advocacy or practice, how have you been able to combat some of the misinformation and, quite frankly, just the lack of knowledge in a fast-moving legal environment in order to get the proper and accurate information out to people who need assistance? And I will start with Maggie, if you don't mind.
Not at all. So, we hear from our staff, from our those we serve, our clients, that some of the local media in Dari and Pashto and Arabic in other languages is not accurate. It's not sharing accurate information. So we made a decision early on, because we have an amazing language services team, that we were going to try to share short, highly informative, relevant pieces of information as things developed, as the situation changed with our clients, and prioritize translation and interpretation. So on our website, there is an immigration resource hub. Far from perfect, but it has, as best as we can manage it, the most up-to-date information in 6 different languages plus English. We are concerned that so much information is in English and so much of it is wrong. And so we wanted to create this resource both for people who are looking for information in English, but more specifically for our clients that they knew that they could trust. And so that is a resource that's available to everyone. We also have community meetings with our clients, and not just with those we immediately serve, but with the wider community. We don't care who comes. Those are also interpreted into 6 different languages, and I think we proudly almost broke Zoom. We had to have a conversation with Zoom headquarters because we had so many languages in breakout rooms, and I think Zoom wasn't sure what to do with us, but we made it through. And so that language equity is a big part of IRIS. It's part of what we do daily for the people that we serve, but we think that now especially that's particularly important. It doesn't mean everything is translated, obviously, but at least information that folks need to know is available to them.
So the program that Diana Blank, who's here, and I supervise, the Asylum and Human Rights Clinic, is different than IRIS and other community-based organizations in that we are primarily a provider of intensive legal services to families who are heading towards very time and resource intensive trials in immigration court. So we are doing a lot of counseling of the particular clients and families we're representing. We're relying on the good efforts of community-based groups like IRIS, like Hartford Deportation Defense, Connecticut Students for a Dream, Make the Road, Building One Community, to do more of the community outreach to make sure that people know their rights. But we are counseling our clients on how best they can protect themselves, what to do if taken into detention, how to prepare a family preparedness plan so that there'll be someone with a power of attorney and someone who can take guardianship of the children. It's a hard time. There's a lot of misinformation. We often encounter clients or prospective clients who are afraid to go to immigration court for their hearings with some reason, but may not realize that if they don't show up for their hearings, they're going to be ordered removed from the United States in absentia, and then it's going to be very hard to undo that. There are no easy choices for people. The, the situation is such so that any course of action has some risk, and that involves, careful counseling of people to make sure they understand their rights, and what, for example, what to do if immigration agents turn up at their doorstep, the fact that they don't have to let them in unless ICE has a judicial warrant. But on the other hand, we can counsel people about those rights, and ICE may disregard them and make extravagant claims about what they are authorized to do under their interpretation of the Fourth Amendment. So in Minnesota, they were knocking people's doors down, even though they had no judicial warrants.
I'll add just two things. Well, I think first it's important to say, this is a really scary time. I'm a U.S. citizen. I frankly can't understand the level of fear. I mean, I can understand it, but I can't. I don't have in my bones the level of fear that I see among clients, among advocates, among friends, among people who are really, really uncertain of whether they're going to be abducted in broad daylight. That's wild. There are no words for how wild that is, right? So I think obviously, sympathy, empathy, just humanity go a long way these days in really trying to understand where people are emotionally, because it's an impossible time. And doing anything that we can, with all the layers of privilege that some of us, or various layers of privilege we might have, to try to make it just a little bit easier for folks. And it's really been just awe-inspiring to see the community groups, some of the organizations that John mentioned, and many others rallying in this time and working together in such a beautifully coordinated way to kind of provide for people and help people just navigate a really turbulent environment. The other thing I wanted to say is, from a ACLU slash, I don't speak for the ACLU, but from a advocate slash civil rights, civil liberties perspective, we are trying to emphasize to anyone who's interested and willing to hear that our rights are our rights, right? And we have a lot of Know Your Rights materials on our website and on many other websites, and they're quite helpful. We're really trying to get word out about what are my First Amendment rights when observing ICE, what are my Fourth Amendment rights when immigration officials or government employees show up at my door. We want people to have the information and to really kind of internalize the information. On the other hand, there's a big grain of salt here, or at least a dose of pragmatism, which is that a lot of these agencies are acting totally recklessly and lawlessly, right? And we have to, I think, acknowledge that on some level, that your rights are your rights, but also we will not be with you vindicating them in the moment when push comes to shove, or we hope to be, but we may not be. And you need to do what you need to do for yourself, for your own family, for your own safety, right? So that element of messaging is new, at least in my career, to really, really emphasize the practical, that yes, we all have rights. And again, not just citizens, not just lawful permanent residents, we all have rights. On the other hand, you are the best judge of kind of what to do in each situation you encounter. And so we've had to kind of, there's a tension there. We have to acknowledge, I think, that that the elephant in the room.
So as a follow-up to that, and just going down the line and starting with you, Alana, knowledge is power. And as you mentioned, we've seen organizing happening around the country. What are some of the biggest or most frequent misconceptions or questions that you hear from people as you do your daily work?
Just on the litigation side, since I'm a litigator and I cannot pretend to be a legislative advocate or a policy person.
Totally fine.
So I'll,
in
my own space, I'll stay in my lane. I think one other thing that we probably should say out loud is the immigration system was a mess before January of 2025. It was a mess before January of 2016. Like it was a mess. It was not this. It's not like this was a really simple, beautifully working system that everyone could understand, that played fair, that wasn't inherently racist. I mean, it was a mess before a year and a half ago, or however long it's been. So already, I think there are just substantial barriers to understanding what is my status, what are my rights, where are my cases, is my case or my cases going, and I think that's only multiplied exponentially, right, in this environment. So I think people, I guess what I've seen is people, it's so much information to take in and from so many angles, and it's ever changing. I mean, it really is, like minute to minute. The attacks are relentless, that I think it's just people at some point just kind of shut down. It's like too much to really to try to understand. And then people kind of resort to just, a base fear. So I think it's not so much a misconception as a, this is an impossible system. And if you're in it, you really can, trying to help people take ownership, take some kind of feel autonomy in an impossible place, I think has been really important for clients that we've worked with. One example is when, I don't know if y'all remember, students here at UConn and elsewhere across the state had their student status terminated overnight about a year ago, almost a year ago exactly, by literally the switch of a computer, and suddenly they were no longer allowed to study. Students who'd been here for years were no longer allowed to pursue their PhDs or their degrees, and basically we're getting emails overnight saying, you better leave the country right now. And that's a paraphrase, but it's a real loose, like, that's pretty much what the email said. So again, I think in the face of these like inexplicable, just totally egregious attacks on the processes that we know, I think that there's a real temptation to be like, to throw your hands up and just say, I don't know what these people are doing, and maybe I need to just get out of here. And again, I think it's this like trying to, even if the rule of law is somewhat disintegrating in our faces, like trying to uphold the processes, the regulations, the laws that we know are there, even if they're being disregarded.
So I guess adding to that, and anyone else on the panel can feel free to respond to what I just asked or this. How do you propose people seeking information on their rights gather information? Sometimes it's best to maybe lead from what not to do, right? Always trust verified sources, things like that. But what are some of the suggestions that you have for people?
In terms of finding accurate information?
Yes. Yep.
Yeah, always look at the source. And if you don't know what the source is, if it's a name or an account that, is not someone you've heard of as a media figure or an authority in that particular area, research who they are. We've got to become better consumers of information. I came here from Tunisia, running democratic governance programs, and before that had done that across the Middle East. It's really interesting, having lived in countries where people inherently don't trust public information. Americans are very trusting, and we need to ask more questions. It's not about not trusting, it's about just saying, who's saying this? Is this an authority in the subject, or is this someone who has an opinion? And opinions are great, but at least you know the dividing line, and you can start making more informed decisions about the information you consume. I'm a big fan of Heather Cox Richardson. If anyone doesn't know who she is, you should. She is a historian at the University of Maine, and I have become pretty evangelical in trying to promote her because she is really great at synthesizing information. You can disagree with someone's perspective, but she takes facts and she puts them together in some pretty compelling ways. On misconceptions, I'll be quick. Iris is still here. Resettlement agencies are still doing work. We made a decision not to resettle Afrikaners and lean into, you're right, the system has always been racialized, but now I think we've taken this to some other crazy level. And even without welcoming the few newcomers who are coming, the work we have done that you know so well, getting apartments, getting people jobs, getting kids in school, helping people with their health issues, just helping folks acclimate. This isn't a task that stops. The active welcome is ongoing. And if you've ever helped welcome a family, some of you may know community sponsor groups. There are some amazing community sponsor groups in the Hartford area. It goes on for years. It's really hard to come from the Congo to the United States, to Connecticut. It's very, very different. It's hard if you're Rohingya and you may have not really used a cell phone before or even a computer, and now you are thrown into the United States and everything requires you to have some level of digital literacy. And we're not even getting into language. It takes a long time. Increasingly, our staff, like I think the staff everywhere, have more to do and more people to serve, and there's fewer of us. But that welcome, that is a beautiful thing. And it takes many, many years for people to really acclimate. And then what we love best is when they come back at year 10 or 12 or 20, and they tell us about a business they've opened. Might still need some help with licensing and understanding bureaucratic procedures that I don't think any of us understand. And, you know, to see people actually having a chance to thrive and feel connected and still know that this resource is there that they can come back to as a touchstone. So just all of the immigrant serving groups, even without new people coming, we all have Herculean challenges, and just keep that in mind as you think about helping those in your community.
All right, so we are getting close to time, but Chief, a question for you. We've talked a little bit about the Trust Act, and we know that your job is to ensure your community is safe and that officers abide by the law. Can you talk a bit about how training your officers on what the law is crucial to what you do, and how have you seen those efforts kind of manifest themselves in building community trust in West Hartford?
All right, thank you. You don't know what you don't know until you know what you don't know. And the problem we have, what we can have with our officers, is to expect our officers to know the Trust Act, the criminal statutes, how to deal with mental health issues is an unrealistic expectation. So what we do, we have what's called Power DMS. I'm not advocating for this company. This is just what we use. So it's software that pushes out new policies. So we have an 11 or a 12-page policy for West Hartford, which incorporates the Trust Act. Our officers, it's pushed out to them on a computer, and they have to take a test. They have to get 3 or 4 questions correct, and it's unlimited time. So if you can't get one wrong, like it has to be a 100. And then once you pass that, then you're fine to say you have the acuity to go forward. Then it's backed up with conversations with your sergeant or your lieutenant regarding various scenarios and how you would interact with them. And per our policy, if there's ever a situation that's even close to the Trust Act, a supervisor must be contacted. And the notification of that goes all the way up to, and many times to, my office as chief. At the bare minimum, it will get to the assistant chief's level. So it's very, very important. I actually brought a copy of our policy here. But the expectation for officers in the field to know this off the top of it, it's not realistic. It really, really isn't. So it's important for officers to know this. It's important for officers to slow down, call a supervisor, pull up the policy, and go step by step regarding when we can notify ICE or when we are contacted by ICE, because there's different criteria based upon those situations.
And I'll just add here, I think this is an important point because in talking to residents, putting on my municipal hat in East Hartford, going back to knowledge is power and information is important. Oftentimes when you do explain that there's training that happens, that law enforcement, local law enforcement is a resource that you still can use and you should feel free to reach out to them and that they will be helpful, is a value to the entire community. And creates more community cohesion. One of the things that I've been concerned about on the town council, right, is that there's a large part of the community that may feel disconnected from services that are theirs too, because of everything that's happening at the federal level. And so communication is important, knowledge is important, and is better for everyone overall. So as we start wrapping up, and then we'll go to audience questions, when we speak about the Constitution and our legislative branch and the judicial branch, obviously everyone has said things are difficult right now. But as we look ahead, what do you think we will start seeing over the next 10 years? And then how are we going to work to find reasonable, just, and sustainable solutions? I'd like to end with
I'll jump on that. The bigger question is a morality question. The degradation of our society started many, many years ago, and we're seeing the manifestation of that degradation of morality, of human decency, which led to our current situation. Our prognosis going forward, I don't know. Quite frankly, I don't know. What I believe we're seeing, and I'm going out of my chief's role to my person's role, what we are seeing in society and what's being accepted as to how we got there started decades ago. And for us to be able to look into the future as far as what we believe 10 years can be, hopefully it gets better. If we're thinking just a change of administration is going to make things better, I think we're setting ourselves up for failure. We need to have more discipline in the homes. We need to have more conversations in the homes, and we need to stop looking to law enforcement to parent where parents should parent. And I'll just stop before I get into trouble.
Okay.
No worries. John, in the legal landscape, what do you see?
Well, I'm going to quote from a decision issued last month by a federal judge in West Virginia who began a decision by writing, "Antiseptic judicial rhetoric cannot do justice to what is happening. Across the interior of the United States, agents of the federal government, masked, anonymous, armed with military weapons, operating from unmarked vehicles, acting without warrants of any kind, are seizing persons for civil immigration violations and imprisoning them without any semblance of due process. It is an assault on the constitutional order. It is what the Fourth Amendment was written to prevent. It is what the Due Process Clause of the Fifth Amendment forbids." So I think that captures what is going on. Courts are pushing back although they have limited tools to push back with, because the system gives so much discretion to the federal government. The state of Connecticut is pushing back and should be doing more to push back. Very positive steps have been taken through the Trust Act. Recent legislation bans arrests without judicial warrants on the grounds of state courthouses. And there's legislation pending that would do the same for sensitive locations like churches, schools, and hospitals, saying that there can't be arrests there without a judicial warrant. There's also legislation being considered, and bills like this have been enacted already in New Jersey and Washington State that would bar law enforcement officers operating in the state, regardless of whether they're state police or federal officers, from hiding their identities, from going around masked. except in narrowly limited circumstances like undercover investigations. And another pending bill would give state residents in Connecticut the ability to sue federal or state agents for violations of constitutional rights, because the main federal civil rights law that lets people sue public officials, Section 1983, only allows suits against state and local officials, not federal officials. But the state can provide a remedy in court for people who face violations of their constitutional rights by federal agents as well as state agents. And that may provide, again, nothing's going to be a magic bullet in itself, but all of these tools can make some incremental progress in pushing back against what's the mass violations of rights that are currently going on.
Can I very quickly, I haven't said much today. I've tried to be very brief. Therein lies the problem, is what he just outlined. Laws are interpreted by who? People. People. If you have a degradation in society, if a degradation of how people interpret things and what the blurred line between right and wrong, the law can be great, but I will interpret it as I feel necessary. And that's what's happening right now. As much as we might love the United States Supreme Court, supposed to be insulated from politics, first couple of decisions that came out, I'm not going to say anymore. Now there's being some pushback because all of the violence that has occurred, because the cameras that have come out. Now people are being forced to do their constitutional rights, and constitutional responsibilities to uphold the Constitution. Now they're doing that. But laws are enforced by people, they're interpreted by people. I need to get back to that, because the blind lady of justice is not blind, she peeks every now and then.
Slightly different spin on that. One of my favorite quotes, and I think it's been misattributed to Thomas Paine, I'm not sure who said it, is the eternal price of liberty is vigilance. And I think that that is, it's been cutting through for me different parts of this conversation, being informed consumers of information, understanding what your constitutional rights are and that they apply to everyone, and helping make sure that our laws are being applied to everyone. And so being an observer and taking those videos and sharing that information to make sure that that person who is defenseless has someone looking out for them. And I think that for us, more selfishly in our work, we're not looking at refugee resettlement coming back anytime before 2030, even with a complete change of administration. I pity whoever comes next, who is, and I will avoid labels, pro-human, because we could use some folks that are pro-human and maybe not acting in their own self-interest. And so if we could get those two things, I would be pretty happy. And they're going to have a tall order ahead of them. Think of all of the social programs that have come crashing down, and more this year. There's a lot that has to be redressed. And I would understand if a large-scale rewrite of the immigration system, which has not been possible for many years because it's so polarized, doesn't happen. And with it, it means that our doors are not as open perhaps as they should be. I would understand, because there's just so much to do. There are so many people to take care of. Ours are just one among many commas. So that's not a very hopeful outlook.
I'll end on a hopeful note, I promise. I plus one, echoing, I think a few of the themes that have come up. I think an attack on all fronts needs to be fought on all fronts, right? So there's so much that we can do. I mean, that's if there's a silver lining to all of this, it's like there are many ways to plug in to make the next 10 years or the future, however we want to define it what we want to see. One is to encourage Connecticut to be brave and bold in enacting legislation that can fortify rights here and try to protect our neighbors and our communities. My colleague Gus is in the back here and can talk to you a lot about what legislation to support. So I will defer entirely to him, but some of the things John mentioned are very much needed. The Trust Act is great to have. There's a lot more that we could be doing. Again, to bolster our defenses against encroachment by the federal government. Support all the lawyers and advocates fighting in the federal court system to uphold our rights, to kind of hold the line on, if there's a First Amendment violation, we're going to take that to court. We're not going to, close our eyes and hide in a corner because it involves immigration, right? So, however you want to support, if you're one of those lawyers, if you want to support those lawyers and advocates, do that. And then last and not least at all, probably one of the most important things, I think, is just to support the community organizations and plug into the community organizations that are really on the front lines here in Connecticut and really across the country in trying to fight back against some of the worst offenses. And a really, I think, hopeful example that I'll just share, because I think it's really been giving me hope. A community member in New Haven, where I live, was taken during one of the car wash raids now back in Labor Day. She is a mom of young kids, and she, when she was taken, groups across this state and across other states rallied to try to figure out, one, where was she? So airplane watchers in Massachusetts and New Hampshire were watching the planes that she was being flown across the country on. Advocates at detention facilities in Louisiana were on guard to see if she showed up there. People here were taking standby guardianship of her kids to make sure that they had a safe place to be while their mom was missing, abducted. And ultimately, some random lawyer in Virginia who doesn't even do this for a living took a habeas case in Michigan to help try to fight and get her out of detention there with the help of community advocates. It was truly a patchwork. It was an incredible patchwork to see in real time. A lot of on the ground folks here, I can't name them all, but deserve so much credit for basically seeing one person caught up in this web and saying, that's not okay with us. What can we do? And ultimately achieving exactly what they'd hoped for, which was getting her out of immigration detention, back to New Haven, back to her children, back to her life. She's gonna have a long fight in immigration court, but at the very least, it took almost 100 people probably to do this one thing. One of them just drove her 2 hours. Even that mattered. So there are ways to plug in. There are reasons for hope. The rallying, I'm not saying this lightly. It is so amazing to see what we can do if we work together against the vastness of this problem.
I really appreciate that example, and we're going to go to audience questions, because I think if we look at history, obviously it ebbs and flows, but I think a constant theme in American history is that the brilliance and power of the Constitution is often vindicated by years of work by people who you don't read their names in the textbooks, right? We don't get a Civil Rights Act out of nothing. We don't get, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments out of nothing. We don't get suffrage out of nothing. It is oftentimes millions of people saying, hey, Constitution, we should do something about this and make sure it works for everyone. And, it gets back to the very beginning, right? Forming a more perfect union. So I appreciate everyone's time and the conversation, and we'll open it up for questions. And we'll get a microphone to you.
Can you hear me? I have a question for the police chief. I'm confused about whether when ICE enters a neighborhood or an area, whether the police have been notified. I've seen different advice about whether a resident should contact the police if ICE is in their neighborhood, or whether that is not an appropriate action to take. Can you explain whether the police are notified when ICE comes into a neighborhood and whether people should reach out to the police?
All right, two separate questions. I'll take the last one first. It's your discretion. If you believe it's ICE, and if you want, or you're not sure it's ICE, you want to call the PD, that's not a problem with that. We're going to respond. That's an individual choice. The initial question that you asked, many times law enforcement in Connecticut has not been notified when ICE comes in. There was a meeting that was held last summer at the U.S. Attorney's Office in New Haven with ICE officials and the Connecticut Police Chiefs Association to deal with and to address this issue. There are many problems with that, which are obvious. I'll just touch on one very, very quickly. The most significant issue is called deconfliction. When you have a federal agency or another state agency that's within your jurisdiction and you don't know that, that could be a problem because both of you could be looking at the same person or location for an investigation, and you might have what we call in the industry blue on blue. Two law enforcement agencies going toe-to-toe or even use of force sometimes in those situations. We'll have people who've been taken by ICE and their loved ones don't know it and think they've been kidnapped. Even we as law enforcement have called for information and not received any cooperation. So we're working on that. That is a significant problem. Has there been improvement in Connecticut? Yes. Is it where we want it? No.
Thank you. Do you think, any of you really, it seems like communication truly is a key thing to the population. Do you think it is worthwhile to involve more of a educated, simplified map to either the press or your towns or the people that do communicate to their communities? Is it a worthwhile endeavor to clarify in simple terms what are the key important things that our leaders are doing to mitigate the circumstances, help untangle the mess we have? I just don't know. It seems almost the information like tonight's forum is certainly out there, but only to a few people who may have seen it and come out. But is there more of a formal effort to try to coordinate among leaders to communicate out some of the key issues that the chief brings up, even at the level of importance of what do we do? How do we seek help? What is the right thing to do instead of guessing?
I'm happy to start, and then I will toss it over, just putting on my municipal hat. So in East Hartford, one of the things that we actually just did, I believe this week, is under our social services website, put a landing page for people who are interested in finding more information about immigration resources. Now, it seems like a small thing, but I think you're right. Communication, accurate information, nonpartisan information, just the facts to people, I think that can be a very helpful thing. In East Hartford, we've seen, initial attempts at that become highly politicized from the outside, but I think it's incumbent upon elected officials, no matter your party or perspective, to ensure that all of your residents have access to accurate, timely information. So I think that's one thing that, at least in East Hartford, we've been doing. And with this, kind of coordinating efforts to provide information to people.
I wanted to note that I think that across UConn Law School, IRIS, ACLU, Connecticut Students for a Dream, I'm not giving you an easy answer. There are different places that you can go that may not be providing exactly what you're talking about. We're not going to work on helping clarify what Connecticut leadership is doing. That's Connecticut leadership's job. And I think they're trying to do a better job at providing more clear information, but there's many different leaders and they have their own social media channels. We're just trying to provide information that communities that care about immigrants and people who are immigrants can access. And that's going to be very limited and clear and in some cases oversimplified. But on all of our websites, there's key information, and some of it's good to go to multiple credible outlets because you're going to get different sets of information. We don't carry what the ACLU has. It's incredible, it's rich, it's deep, and you're going to learn so much about our constitutional rights and what you can do. Our focus is a little bit different.
Hi, good evening. I want to begin by thanking all of you for being here and taking the time to talk about a very sensitive and important matter. And I want to appreciate everyone who's here today, either through Zoom or in here personally, to either learn or to receive feedback of how to handle this ongoing issue that has gone far worse than it should have ever have gone. My name is David, and I was adopted from Guatemala. And this topic is very touching. I stood here about 3 years ago looking to attend law school. My approach was to always focus on immigration and to help provide knowledge, legal advice, and support to fellow brothers and sisters who either look like me or have the same kind of judgment that they face almost every day. And I've had the privilege to work at the criminal courthouse for almost a year and a half before leaving. And whenever there's a problem, a judge always taught me, if you have a problem that you have to bring up, always come with a solution. And the solution I have or would like to ask is, we talk a lot about credibility and online resources. And when I would work at the criminal courthouse, a lot of people who came in never had access or were able to find the right credible sources. I have fellow partners who attended university with me who still couldn't find credible resources or where to go to. And what I found a lot of the time when I'd work with people in the criminal courthouse going over motions for continuances, 14140s, closed out cases, how to contact their attorneys, a lot of them were able to find places that they felt comfortable. You know, we talked about connection, and they don't feel connected with us, but sometimes I feel like we don't always feel connected with our own community or people. And I guess my question is, rather than always focusing online, as great as it is, the accessibility, especially for Hartford, at least growing up in Hartford, going to school at Hartford for almost all my life, and then also working there, I found that a lot of places like the library was a very great place for people to find out when their next court date was, who their attorney was. Getting paper forms was a huge factor. And I guess overall, my question is, are there places for people who are unable to speak English or to even understand legal terminology? I have people who speak English just fine who don't even know what their next court date is, even though the judge just told them. You know, the terminology itself within legal field is extremely hard and complex. It's very confusing. And someone who's been working in the legal field for now 3 years, it's very confusing. And I'm just wondering if there's places and accessible places for people, whoever online or here today, to find those resources, whether it's online or not, to come and connect with you people who are greatly doing a great deed for everyone who needs it. And so I guess my question was just to see if there's another way for people to obtain that information that's greatly needed from you guys. Thank you.
I was just going to say, I mean, you're so, first of all, nice to meet you. And you were so right on every level, right? There's a real problem meeting people, I think, where they're at, and getting information to people in ways that are accessible, that are digestible, and quite frankly, like, make sense to them at the time, right? And not without overloading. Have we as a legal profession done a great job of that? No, no. I'll own that on behalf of all lawyers everywhere. No problem. I think so that's a real problem, immigration, non-immigration, across the board. I think there is maybe there's a reckoning with that now on a different level. So maybe this is, again, the hopeful note. Like, I think people really are understanding that we need to do something we as at least as legal professionals or whatever professionals we might be, need to do something to meet people and to meet the moment. So I am seeing more efforts in that direction. Is there like some wonderful clearinghouse / resource? Please, if you find it, let me know. We in my work are trying to kind of consolidate and bring resources together. Frankly, I think the people doing it the best and are really the community groups that are kind of on the ground meeting people. Hartford Deportation Defense here, New Haven Immigrants Coalition where I live, Danbury, and on Stamford, Norwalk, on and on, right? Like I think they really are trying to bring the message to the people. I'm sure there are others who are doing it very well, but I think emulating their efforts and kind of magnifying their outreach would be really, really helpful. And the legal profession should kind of get on board and trying to do that, if I do say so.
Thank you for that, Davi. I would just add to what Alana said that there are efforts underway from Connecticut Students for a Dream and other organizations working with them to create more accessible online resources. It's very challenging though, because things are changing so constantly. You could put something up on a website and it could be inaccurate the next day. That doesn't mean people shouldn't try, but it's very hard to have a stable source of accurate and up-to-date information.
If you're looking for a panacea, it doesn't exist. That's the hard truth. And what we have to accept, we always have to work on closing that gap. 211, a plethora of information there. Almost everybody I know, whether they have a home or not, does have a cell phone or some type of communication that they can utilize. So what you want to do is limit your exposures by closing those gaps. And I think what you see here are pieces of a pie of communication. And hopefully, as we continue to work, that there might be a slice that's left open that we can close at some point. So again, no panacea, but there are a lot of slices to a pie that we're working on.
I want to echo the thanks to all of you for coming tonight and speaking. My question goes out to the chief. You just mentioned a cell phone and everyone having one, and there was a question you fielded from over here earlier about, should someone call the police if ICE is in the neighborhood? And I'm wondering, and I imagine it, there may be differences across police departments and you can only perhaps speak to your own, but your policy in your police department, what do you do if someone calls you and says, I'm in my car and ICE officers are trying to, starting to smash the windows? What, because I think your answer was, it's up to the individual to decide whether to call. So now my question is, your department gets that call. What do you do?
Very easy answer. You call us, we respond. If they're utilizing force, there's different responsibilities that they have. We won't know whether or not they're violating a law or not. They're using force. We will ask, hopefully, a supervisor that's on scene, is there a detainer? Do you have this information? All the things that are part of the Trust Act. And they go forward. It is not our obligation to get into intervene at that point if they're affecting an arrest. When we get there, we have to try to figure it out. And that's what we go for. I wouldn't say negotiate. I think I'll give you an example. We get a call that a person has a gun and is attempting, just hear me out, at a residence. We arrive, we see two people, and we see a person shooting at someone else, and maybe we utilize force on the person who shoots, only to find out that it was a homeowner who was shooting at someone who had broken into their house. So you have to do your due diligence. You have to find out the why, see what's going on, and try to find out what's happening. If something is going on at that time, we can't get into the middle of that until we figure out what's going on. Again, it's an easy answer, but it's not an answer that people like to hear, but that's just what it is. No, sure.
The case is the most extreme because I think there are plenty of cases that don't go to this level that are still extraordinarily compelling. But this is a case that is, you know, we've all heard footage, I think, or many of us have, of people, of 911 calls where people are saying, I'm a US citizen, and they're trying to break into my car. I'm not saying that that should be the, the floor or the ceiling. But, you know, if you're able to ascertain that,
Again, easy.
so what do you do?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
once you've got the facts,
Yep.
what does
The
what do
likelihood,
we count on
yeah,
the police?
the likelihood of us physically getting intervening is slim to none. What's going to happen is we'll get the documentation. We have body cams. We will have our body cams on. We will take statements. We will write a report depicting what occurred as ICE, in this situation, potentially illegally utilize their authority. That's what we would do in that situation. And the other issue, really quick, I have to answer this correctly. Maybe the attorneys can help you. The difference with ICE, where I thought you were going, I was waiting for you to say this at the end. Connecticut has a statute and obligation for duty to intervene. The problem with ICE is not really a law enforcement agency for us to have that duty to intervene versus if that was Connecticut State Police, another police department, and we found out that there was an exercise of illegal force that was being exercised, then we have a duty to intervene. Otherwise, we could be subject to prosecution.
I'm definitely not in the business of giving advice to law enforcement, so I appreciate that the chief's answer on that front. I just wanted to add, just from a know your rights kind of bystander perspective, and this is a know your rights, one of our know your rights guides that the ACLU has published about what you can do if you're observing immigration enforcement in action. There really are a lot of things you can do. You can and please should record the interaction. You should write down specific information, who's present, are they ICE agents, can you tell who else they might be, what are they doing, how long are they there, what, if anything, you know about the person being detained. You can also speak, if appropriate, speak to the person being detained, try to get information from them. Who can I contact? What can I do? That kind of thing can be really helpful. So documenting is real and is really critical, and you have an absolute right to record. ICE doesn't necessarily agree, but you do, and to document. Where things get tricky is the weaponizing of what's called 18 USC 111, which is it's an interference with federal officers carrying out their duties statute that now the federal government is really using aggressively to prosecute people. So there, again, grain of salt, pragmatism, there's a real line. You cannot interfere with, I mean, you can, but you can then be prosecuted for interfering with immigration enforcement. So certainly not touching them, getting in their way, right? That's a no. But on the other hand, there's a lot you can do just as an observer and a documentarian of these interactions. So separate and apart from anything you might do in terms of calling the police, I would really encourage folks to read some of these Know Your Rights guides about what you can do as a bystander witnessing immigration enforcement.
Want to be mindful of time since it's about 7:50, but I have a question from online. Could the failure of ICE to notify local authorities of their presence be an unintended consequence of the Trust Act?
I'm not the legal authority here, but it's my understanding that the Trust Act doesn't apply to the federal level. And I don't know. I need my attorneys to help me here. So it applies to us, not to them.
Yeah, I would say I think that the short answer to that is the Trust Act here in Connecticut prevents our law enforcement agencies from essentially being retrofitted to do the federal government's bidding in immigration enforcement, right? They cannot affirmatively cooperate with ICE and its peer agencies. So I don't see the linkage there. I don't think ICE particularly cares about informing, frankly. I mean, what do I know? But I don't think they particularly care to inform people because, again, they're operating as they want to without much regard for other agencies or for the law. So no, I would say no to that. They're kind of separate. They're distinct things.
Going over there, if you remember from the police accountability bill, The same thing applied to federal agencies coming into to Connecticut. They didn't have to wear body cams.
Hey, getting back to many places to plug in and communication and preparedness, I wonder if you all are familiar at all with the Red Folder Project. It's Hartford Deportation Defense and other organizations are mobilizing volunteers to help people gather in advance the documents that a lawyer would need to file for bond for them if they're detained. So that can be done quickly, hopefully before they get transported to Texas or someplace like that. And it's, I think, in the infancy stages, trying to figure out how to connect volunteers with people who might be at risk of being detained, and includes not only guardianship and the family preparedness, power of attorney stuff, but actual, letters of support and documents that show you've been in this country more than 2 years and a bunch of things like that.
Thank you for uplifting that the Red Folder Project, and it goes by various names in various places, but just helping people get their documents together in one place, easily accessible, easily transferable, is so critical. If you're a lawyer trying to file a habeas, if you're an immigration lawyer trying to fight for bond, you need those documents and you need them yesterday. So that is a wonderful way to plug in, and I really commend folks who are helping others get those together. Sorry, I got excited, so I jumped in.
I promised the gentleman in the audience that I'd figure out a way to talk about habeas, but you all beat me to it, so I'm glad to see that. Thank you, everyone, for attending this evening, both here in person and online. Thank you to all of our panelists for providing your expertise and your thoughts. Hopefully this will be helpful, and thank you again. Have a good night.